Hey there folks, I'm Carmen and I'm 30, female. I've been battling self-esteem issues since I popped out of the womb, all thanks to my parents, Neil and Jackie, and my perfect older sister, Grace. When it comes to my parents, I want to say that they're lovely people. But how lovely can you be when they never really acknowledged me when I was growing up? They've always had this thing about wanting me to be more like Grace. As I've mentioned, Grace is the golden child, the one who excels at everything she does and gets accolades and praise left and right. It's like she was born to impress. Me? Well, I'm just me, and I'm okay with that, but my parents never seemed to be. My parents never said it to my face, but I could always tell they were disappointed that I wasn't chasing the same goals as Grace. I mean, who wouldn't be? It's tough knowing you're the one who doesn't quite measure up in your parents' eyes. Fast forward a bit and we were all gathered for another one of those good old family dinners. You know, the ones where Grace, the golden child, made an announcement that would change everything. She said she was getting married to her long-term doctor boyfriend, who was just as perfect as she was. I swear it was like watching a real-life Barbie and Ken living their best lives, and I was ugly Betty watching from the nosebleeds. Of course, my parents erupted into applause, so proud of their daughter for achieving what they saw as the pinnacle of a strong and secure relationship. My mom was gawking at the ring, and my dad was shaking Harold's, Grace's fiancé, hand so enthusiastically. "Careful, Dad, you might pop his arm off with all that shaking." "Oh, silly me, I'm just so excited." "Don't worry, dear, it's not like he can't fix it." "You're right, he's a doctor. I mean, look at that. I'm beyond blessed to have such a beautiful and talented daughter." Ouch. Now all that's left is Carmen. It's going to be tough to beat, sweetie. "Honestly, darling, I wouldn't hold my breath." "I'm only teasing, Carmen. Don't get upset, please." Double ouch. I just sat there while everyone was gushing and picking out wedding colors, just feeling a little bit out of place. But I'm used to that feeling. Then came the jokes, the comments about how no man could ever handle my so-called tomboyish nature. I brushed them off because, well, that's what I always did. But when it came to the topic of marriage, my parents' expectations were ruthless. They might have been joking, but I can assure you they expected nothing less than a Prince Charming for their daughters, especially after Grace has set the bar so high. Now, there was an extra layer of pressure, and it was beginning to weigh on me. Would I ever find someone who could meet my family's lofty expectations? Well, as you may have guessed, the answer to that question is no. I did not find a Prince Charming. Instead, I found the sexiest, raunchiest, most kind and caring, yet dominant and assertive cowboy you could ever imagine. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, but would also bring me roses on a random Tuesday. He was just that kind of man. He could make me ugly laugh, and he would always bring me tissues when I would ugly cry, and those dumb old rom-coms. He was perfect. His name is Hugh, and he is my everything. With him, I felt loved and desirable just the way I was, with no need for pretense or trying to fit into someone else's mold, which was so refreshing. I was absolutely smitten with him. Sometimes I'm convinced I must have put a spell on him or something because he was utterly obsessed with me, and I just couldn't imagine why. But I wasn't complaining. Not one bit. Hugh was a farmer, a true cowboy at heart, and he cherished his life. He'd always been a farmer, and the country life resonated with me. I wasn't interested in the hustle and bustle of city life. But my parents just couldn't wrap their heads around that. Even though Hugh was quite literally perfect for me, I was terrified of introducing him to my parents. I knew they wouldn't be kind. They'd take one look at him, hear his accent, and automatically make the worst assumptions. Just the thought of them doing that made my blood boil. Hugh, bless his heart, would assure me that my parents would love him. He'd say things like, "Don't you worry, Carmen. They'll see how much I adore you, and that's all that matters." As much as I was hesitating, there was a part of me that wanted to show Hugh off to the world because I loved him so much. So during our next family dinner, I decided to introduce my boyfriend Hugh to everyone. And as expected, my parents couldn't even attempt to hide their disgust. They'd say crap like, "What an interesting accent," or "Is that a hillbilly accent?" Like, are you kidding me? My man, being the strong person he is, took it like a champ, and every time I intervened to try and get my parents to shut up, he'd give my hand a squeeze and let me know that everything was okay. And he seemed to be handling everything pretty okay until that dreaded question came up. "So, Hugh, what do you do for a living?" "I'm a farmer." Everyone in the room burst into laughter like Kevin Hart himself was in the room. Me and Hugh were just looking at each other like, "Oh boy, good joke, son." "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not joking." "What?" "There's no way you're a farmer." "Jackie, obviously he's pulling your leg." "Mom, Dad, he's not joking. He's a farmer, and I'm happy with that. He's happy. We're really happy together, and we're even thinking of getting married." At that moment, I saw something in my parents shift, and I was transported back to being a 3-year-old getting in trouble for stealing candy from the drawers. "Well, that's just fantastic." "Sir, don't talk to me." "Dad!" "Carmen, how could you do this to us? Do you want us to become a laughing stock? Are you two being serious right now? You do realize we're in 2023, right?" "Listen, no daughter of mine is going to marry some redneck hillbilly." "Well then, maybe I shouldn't be your daughter." "Carmen, how could you say that?" "Oh, don't act so innocent, Mom. You two have been treating me like less than ever since I was born. And now that you learned I might be happy for the first time in my miserable life, you treat me like this. You treat the person I love like this." "Carmen, wait." "I love Hugh. I know it's hard for you guys to wrap your heads around that, but if any of you ever at any point in your lives had even an ounce of care for me, you'll see that this is the best decision I could have ever made in my life, and I would like it if the two of you as my parents would accept that. Accept that I am me, and I am always going to be me, and that I am in love with this man." "Cut the dramatics, Carmen. You're not listening to us. You can't seriously consider marrying him." "It seems like we came here in vain, babe. Let's go. But before I do, I'd like to extend the olive branch one more time. I'm choosing Hugh every single time, and I want you to be there when we get married. Will you come?" I looked at everyone in the room, and they were all shifting uncomfortably in their seats. That's what I thought. Me and Hugh drove back to the countryside after that awful excuse of a family bonding dinner, feeling so relieved. We knew that we belonged in the countryside among the open fields and endless skies, and it wasn't up to anyone else to decide that for us. A few months later, after Hugh proposed to me under the night sky, I had sent out wedding invitations to my family, as one does. I was hoping that perhaps the time and the distance apart would allow my parents to cool down and use their brain cells, but alas, I was wrong. The RSVPs never came. Stupidly enough, I thought that perhaps they didn't get the letters in the mail, because in my mind there was simply no way that they would opt to miss their daughter's wedding. But when I call my parents, all they would do is decline my calls and leave my messages unread. I was so hurt, you all. I couldn't understand why they hated me so much. I was left feeling helpless, angry and constantly in tears, and my husband, ever the smart one day sat me down when I was moping and told me, Carmen, it's time to consider cutting emotional ties with your parents. I see you every day, and you look miserable. I'm so sorry that your parents treat you like crap. If only they could see what I could see, they'd beat themselves silly for realizing all the harm they've done to you. You deserve to be happy. Screw what Neil thinks. Screw what Grace thinks. Screw what Jackie thinks. Hell, screw what you think. I know that you deserve to be happy, and I'm ready to dedicate the rest of my life to proving that to you, even if you don't believe it for yourself. You're the best goddamn thing that ever happened to me, and I can't bear to see you waste your tears on people who are so miserable themselves. I began to realize that Hugh was right, as always. I chose this life because it made me happy, and I let those energy vampires toy with my emotions and make me forget what all this was for. I did this for me, for Hugh, for us. I wanted the life that we were building together, and I owed it to myself to see it through and not be held back by my awful parents and their stupid expectations. On the day of my wedding, my parents and other family members were nowhere to be found. The only family present was Hugh's mother, Rue, a kind and loving woman who had accepted me with wide open arms. Even though it was all quite a bit sad that they didn't even show up for my wedding, I accepted that I couldn't control other people's actions. I was responsible only for the life I was creating. Nonetheless, my wedding was like a dream to me, and Hugh made sure that I was smiling every second. So that's a win in my books. After marrying Hugh, we combined our resources to purchase a large piece of land in the countryside where we could live off the land and raise our future family in the peaceful environment we both cherished. I had learned to choose happiness and accept the family that loved and supported her. A few months passed after the wedding, and my parents wouldn't stop bombarding me with messages suggesting that it wasn't too late for an annulment or even a divorce if it came down to it. It's funny how they were so unavailable for their daughter's wedding, but now they have all the time in the world to text me about a divorce. Some people in this life are truly evil, and there's nothing you can do about it. Their persistent prying and lack of support left me with no choice but to block them. I had decided that I wanted nothing more to do with my parents, who had shown time and time again that they didn't care about my happiness at all. Hugh was proud of me for choosing myself. Our bond only grew stronger, and I cherished him even more. We poured our hearts and efforts into improving our farm. With Hugh's background in farming, it didn't take long before it became a tremendous success. We started supplying local grocery shops and even some high-end chains with high-quality produce, dairy, honey, and meat. Our farm was on the rise, and we couldn't have been happier. Then came the news that I was pregnant after our second anniversary. Our hearts were filled with joy as we looked forward to growing our family. Life was sweeter than ever, and my love for Hugh and our growing family was unwavering. I no longer dwelled on my awful parents. I had healed from all the emotional baggage they had dumped on me and was now living a life full of happiness and love. We were sitting around the bonfire one beautiful and starry night when Rue leaned in and said, "Carmen, I'm so sorry to bring this up, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but have you heard from your parents lately? There's a reason why I'm asking." I took a moment before replying. I blocked them a while ago. I honestly have no idea what's going on with them, and I don't care to find out. Why are you asking? Rue's face turned kind of pale and said, "You know, Carmen, I overheard people talking at the market today. They were discussing a high-rise doctor who's getting sued by his in-laws for medical malpractice on his father-in-law. It's become quite the town's gossip." Hugh and I shared a confused look. People all over town are talking about how conflicted the doctor's wife is, not knowing whether she should stay with him or leave, and the in-laws are furious with her because she chooses to stand by her husband. So now she's estranged from her parents. It sounds really messy. The story was intriguing, but I refused to believe it was about my parents. I thought it had to be a completely different family, as my parents couldn't possibly end up in such a predicament. Not the perfect golden child being disgraced, surely hell would have frozen over first. Hugh and I decided to brush off the story Rue had told us, chalking it up to mere local gossip. Our life was so full, our farm flourishing, and with a baby on the way, we had little time to dwell on such matters. A couple of months later, we found ourselves at the farm participating in a massive interview with a local news station about our success story. I was unmistakably pregnant, which added to the buzz of it all. Honestly, we looked like your typical white picket fence family, except in the country, and we both beamed with excitement as we shared our journey and dreams to the interviewer, no doubt gaining us more success and fame. The interview was successful but long and exhausting. I obviously couldn't stand for extended periods, so we wrapped it up earlier than planned. As we drove back to our massive ranch house, we noticed a familiar car in the driveway. My heart sank as I realized it was my parents' car. What the hell were they doing here? We also noticed Rue's car in the driveway, which was unusual, but it made sense since there was no other way for Neil and Jackie to be here. Even then, Hugh and I were confused because my parents had never met Rue before. Because they missed the wedding and refused to be a part of my life. I didn't know what I was supposed to be expecting, but I braced myself anyway. We cautiously entered our home, and there we found Neil and Jackie, and let me tell you, it was not looking good. My dad was in a wheelchair with a stomach bug, looking quite like the Tim Burton movie. Both of my parents looked exhausted and angry, like their faces had been so weary, as if they were traveling the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. The situation was confusing, to say the least. As we entered the room, Rue and my parents finally noticed our return. Rue broke the silence, saying, "Ah, you two are back. How did the interview go? Neil, Jackie, meet my son and my beautiful daughter-in-law, but I'm sure you don't need an introduction." "What's going on?" "Oh, Carmen, my beautiful baby." "What?" "We missed you so much, and we see what you've done for yourself out here, and you're pregnant." "Yes, obviously." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Why on earth would I tell you that?" "Oh, come on, Carmen. Are you seriously still angry about what happened last time? I'll admit I had my doubts about this arrangement." "Doubts? More like full-blown reservations." "Hugh, please. The way we spoke when we last saw each other, I wanted to put that behind us." "What the hell are you two doing here, and what the hell happened to Dad?" My parents began to tell Hugh and me their side of the story, looking embarrassed as they should. It turned out that the story that Rue had told us around the fire a couple of months ago was actually about my parents and Harold and Grace. Neil explained that he needed surgery due to his bowel problem, so he went to his sister-in-law, Harold, and probably went at a family discount too. However, Harold proved to be pretty careless, according to Neil, and he ended up botching his surgery and leaving him in a wheelchair with a colostomy bag collecting his waste. Yikes. The situation was humiliating, and you could see it had taken a heavy toll on their marriage. Then I asked about Grace, and Neil and Jackie looked even more uncomfortable. They revealed that they weren't really on speaking terms with her at the moment because Grace had chosen to stand by her husband rather than supporting her parents. Hugh then asked how they had contacted Rue. Rue chimed in, explaining that Neil and Jackie thought they could trick her into providing charity service because she ran a small lodge in the countryside which served as a bed and breakfast. "They didn't think that I knew who they were, but I told you I'm thorough and I do my research. So while they thought they had the one-up on me, I was 3 steps ahead of them." "How could you do this to us? Lie to us like this? Why didn't you just tell us you knew it was us? You can see we're clearly struggling, and this is how you treat us?" Rue couldn't help but express her thoughts, calling Neil and Jackie pathetic parents for their actions. Jackie started crying, mentioning that they were running low on money to cover their legal fees while trying to sue Harold as well as Neil's medical expenses. Finally, I asked them directly what they wanted from me and why they were here, and a heavy silence in the air. Neil finally spoke up, saying, "Carmen, we've missed you and we need your help, please." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I burst into laughter, and they all exchanged confused glances. I took a deep breath and said, "All my life I've been treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. The people who were supposed to love me only treated me poorly. They treated me like crap when I wanted to marry the love of my life, and now they're crawling back. Karma is a real bitch, isn't it?" Neil and Jackie looked taken aback, unsure of what to say next. "Good for them." "How could you speak to your parents that way? What is wrong with you? Can't you see that we're struggling here?" That's when Hugh couldn't contain his anger any longer and shouted at them. "You've lost all respect here. You have no right to be on our property, and you have no right to speak to my wife this way. You haven't even apologized for what you've done. You're just expecting me to bend over backwards to help you? I mean, seriously, who does that?" Neil and Jackie seemed genuinely surprised by my response, and their faces fell. "You've been dead to me since my wedding day. I don't want you in my life, and I won't include you in my baby's life either. Get the hell out." Jackie began to cry, saying she wanted to see her grandchild, and this was the worst thing I could do to her. I firmly said no and told them to leave once again, warning them that they'd be escorted out by the sheriff if necessary and that they would never get a dime from any of us. After some yelling and retaliation, they eventually left our property, rejected and clearly not having achieved what they had hoped for. Must suck to be them. Once Hugh helped Neil into the car, which must have been embarrassing, they drove off, and I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. It was like a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders, and I couldn't help but just sob. These tears were different. They were happy tears because for the first time I felt truly free from the grip of my awful parents. Hugh and Rue held me, and they told me that everything would be okay, and I knew it would be eventually. Seeing them alone was too much contact for my unborn baby, and I wanted to make sure they never get the chance to harass this family again. A couple of weeks after the incident, I noticed that Neil and Jackie were still trying their luck. They had seen our interview and the success of our farm and found their way to my social media accounts where they began harassing me. They claimed it was my duty to help my parents despite everything they had put me through. The audacity to try and weasel their way back into my life after everything they put me through was something that needed to be studied. Have they no shame? I blocked and reported them on their accounts, but they persisted and they created new accounts to continue harassing me. I was left with no other choice but to seek restraining orders to ensure I'd never have to hear from them again. It was time to protect my own happiness and the life I was building with Hugh and my baby. I knew they were struggling, and that was the sweetest revenge I could ever get from them. The way that I needed them when I was growing up was how they needed me now, and all I did was reciprocate their actions, and clearly they were mad at that because they thought that they could get away with their neglect and abuse.